Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We got a lot of stuff to get into. Huge week 5 coming up. It is right around the corner. In week 4, we saw our list of 43 teams without a loss get slashed all the way down to just 26 teams. This is going to happen just about every week at this point. 2 pairs of unbeatens are facing off this week. So we know at least at least two are going to get knocked off that list again. This group is just going to continue to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, but we have some tremendous matchups here for you today. It's the prediction show. Garrett Chapman, Abe Gordon here. Georgia and Alabama. We've got Oklahoma State and Kansas State, Louisville, Notre Dame, Illinois, Penn State, Oklahoma, and Auburn. We have tons to get into. It's a jam-packed show. Abe Gordon, before we do any of that, got to welcome you in. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. The only thing I'm going to predict is that I'm going to enjoy the hell out of Saturday night. There's a bunch of good ones in afternoon and through the noon hours as well. But, man, a couple of them at Saturday night really line up nicely. So, very excited.
Yeah, you ain't wrong. And speaking of Saturday night, how about the dogs of the Georgia Bulldogs? They're going out there to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, taking on the Alabama Crimson Tide. Probably the marquee matchup of the year, if not at least this week. Will the weather blow this game up? I think that's been a big issue. Thoughts and prayers to everybody out there dealing with that hurricane that's coming up down, sweeping up the great state of Georgia right now. I know I can look out my window, and it doesn't matter if you're watching this on Thursday or Friday. It's probably raining outside where you are too. But this is the first home underdog matchup for Alabama, going all the way back to 2007, which ironically, that's the same year that their leading wide receiver was born. Ryan Williams, he was born in 2007. That was the last time that they were a home underdog. And Abe, before I start really digging into this game, I just want to ask you this question and get your thoughts on it. Does this game matter more for Kalen DeBoer or Kirby Smart?
On the season or just
however you want to answer
it. It probably matters more. And I'd have to look at the rest of the Alabama schedule, I guess. It probably matters more for Kirby Smart. And I say that to say this. If Georgia doesn't win this game, knowing you've also got a road trip to number 1 Texas, knowing you've got Tennessee at home, and I think a road trip to Ole Miss, it's not overly far-fetched to think that if Georgia is not good enough to beat this Alabama team, I don't know if they're going to be in the playoffs this year. If you're not beating Alabama, you're probably not beating Texas, and obviously that depends on their quarterback situation and stuff like that. But I'm not sold on this Alabama team just yet. And so if Georgia can't go in and win this one, leaves some questions. I'm not saying they'll miss out. I'm saying it leaves a lot more questions. Whereas Alabama's schedule is not overly difficult. If I recall, they don't play Texas, right? They do get Tennessee. They can probably handle this loss a little bit easier and still make their way in. So, and look, as much as we made the Alabama thing about Nick Saban, with the exception of the national championship game a couple years ago, they have been a bugaboo for Kirby Smart and Georgia. I would say it's a bigger game for Georgia. Especially after, and a lot of this has to do with the recent storylines, right? Like Georgia against Kentucky was not overly impressive, and there's that sour taste that's kind of left over. If they can go into Alabama, like that would erase a lot of the questions about the upper tier ability and potential of this team. And so I'll say Georgia to answer that. What about you? It's a tough one. There's not a bad answer, but not really a good defining answer either.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely not a wrong answer for this question, and that's why I asked it. Honestly, I think it's interesting. I heard it on the morning shift on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, and look, I could go either way. I mean, that's the thing, and I could say it's more important for Kalen DeBoer because you're setting up, expectations for what that program's going to be, and I mean, you only have a leash that's so long. I mean, I understand you're only a few weeks into the season. Oh,
God, boy, you pulling that one out
You're only
already.
a few weeks. No, but perception matters for a program like Alabama. You have the team that I consider to be the best in America coming into your home. You're a home underdog. You're expected to lose this game. That said, this is Alabama. This is a program that has not been used to losing at home, but really losing at all since Nick Saban was the head coach there. That's just the reality. And if you're Kalen DeBoer, if you can come in here and get that win, the juice around that program is just going to go right
It's
back.
also validation of that hire, which people
Exactly.
continue to question. And it would be relative immediate validation. And it doesn't mean if they lose this game, he's not validated, right?
Yeah, of course.
We're not making snap judgments on the negative side, but I think if they're able to win this game, it would put a lot of people at ease who like to say roll tide.
Yeah, definitely up there in Tuscaloosa for sure. And look, I do think the correct answer, in my opinion, is Kirby Smart, because you've been dubbed the future dominant force of the SEC, and you've been that for the last couple of years. You've won 2 national championships. You've been by all means the best coach in the conference, of the best team in the conference, I should say, for the last couple of years. And now is the chance to really assert yourself if you're Kirby Smart. That's the expectation. We'll see if that's actually the reality. But look,
Let me flip it around on you and ask a similar question, but instead of the head coaches, the quarterbacks. Who does this game mean more for, Jalen Milroe or Carson Beck?
I say Carson Beck, honestly, because Carson Beck was expected to be the best quarterback in the SEC. And really, if you're the best quarterback in the SEC this season, you're the best quarterback in America. And he hasn't really been that yet. And I think that ultimately, Jalen Milroe is a commodity it's a known commodity. We know what he's going to be. He's going to be a guy who's going to run the football effectively. And they've lined him up actually kind of like almost in this offset I formation type of thing where they can run him like a running back. But then he can also punch you deep, and he can hit these long passes, and he's been really effective at it this season. He's been a little bit less boom bust. It's still kind of how that offense rolls. But Carson Beck, your rushing attack has not really done you a lot of favors. Sure. But great quarterbacks are expected to elevate the rest of their roster. The offense at Georgia it's been okay, really. If you just think about it realistically, you look at the numbers, it's been okay. And if you're Carson Beck and you're expected to be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft next year, or at least potentially be a number 1 pick or a top 5 pick, they're looking at you to come over here into these road environments and show what you can do. If you don't have a rushing attack, tough. Go figure it out. If you're that good, if you were the guy who everybody has tabbed you to be, then you should be able to do this. Doesn't matter where you go. You elevate the rest of your roster. And I'm not saying that, like, if he comes out and has a bad performance, it means he's a bad quarterback, or maybe he validated the haters or whatever. What I'm saying is, if he comes in here and he really does a fantastic job, you want to see this guy's stock skyrocket. That's how it's going to happen. And Jalen Milroe is a great player. He's also playing at home, and I think it's an interesting sort of thing. And I think both of these quarterbacks have a lot on their plate, and both of these quarterbacks are going to be expected to do a whole hell of a lot of heavy lifting.
Well, I think the Jalen Milroe discussion is interesting because as a pro prospect at the next level, it still feels like a very big unknown. And I do think winning this game might make people kind of spotlight him a little bit more than they have been. And then I agree with you in regards to Carson Beck. This guy's supposed to be one of the top 5 picks in the NFL draft, and I have not seen that from him this season. Doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean he's not that guy. It means we haven't seen it yet. And I'm interested to see if we can see that. And to your point again, if we see it on the road against a top 5 team, like even more so can validate that.
Yeah. And look, let's kind of dig into this game a little bit.
Yeah.
I like these questions. Actually, I think it's very interesting because it matters. It matters a lot because perception is reality, especially in college football, where you have some third party who's ranking you. So you have to come out and put together a pretty good performance. I do want to say this one thing before we dive into this. You said that if Georgia loses this game, then they wouldn't be favored in some of those other games. And
no, not that they wouldn't be favored. But I think they're going to have to win. I mean, not obviously that's obviously they have to win, but it's just a tougher road for Georgia if they drop this game to get into the playoffs. I think
the margin for error is smaller.
Alabama's got less risk in games. I just think it's conceivable that Georgia could lose 2 other games if they're not able to beat Alabama. I don't know if Alabama could lose 2 other games based on what's on their schedule, if I remember their schedule correctly.
Yeah, I know you have that Tennessee game, and Auburn's always a weird, fickle game for them. And LSU's on the schedule, but you go up and down this list and you see this as far as the strength of schedules are concerned. Georgia definitely has the toughest schedule of those upper echelon teams who are expected to go out and potentially compete for a national championship. Like you compare them like for like with Alabama or Texas or Ole Miss or Missouri or whoever else, Tennessee, they play the toughest schedule. It's hard. I mean, it just is what it is. And they have to win these types of games. They at least have to contend with several of them. And I look, at the end of the day, I expect Georgia to go out and win this game. That's why they're favored. But this has also been the boogeyman. This has also been the team that you've never really been able to get up over the top. But as far as the game itself, this Alabama team is explosive. That's just their bread and butter. That's not why they won this game last year, though. Jalen Milroe, he hit those short to intermediate routes last year. They were able to find a little bit of success in the rushing attack. It wasn't overwhelming by any means, but it was enough to keep them ahead of the chains. And then Jalen Milroe would complete these passes, and he would break out to the outside, and he'd swing left and right, and he would make these plays. And Isaiah Bond, he hit him hard last year. That's a savvy veteran. He again, it wasn't unbelievable, like eye-popping numbers by any means, but this is also one of the most consistently dominant defenses in all of college football on a year in, year out basis. Georgia doesn't allow a lot of those big plays. So Alabama knew that they had to attack them differently. Can Ryan Williams kind of assert himself in the same way that as Isaiah Bond did last year? He's an explosive player, but I don't necessarily think he's going to have a lot of open running space here in this game. He's averaging 28.5 yards per catch, has 4 touchdowns on the season. It's been a great season for the 17-year-old. And in case you didn't know, he was 17. It was only mentioned 17,000 times in the broadcast of the Wisconsin game. But you have 3 different players on this team, just talking about how explosive they are. 3 different players have at least one 40-yard rush. 5 have at least one 20-yard catch. And then, like I mentioned, Ryan Williams, he has 5 of these catches that have gone for 30 or more yards. The Georgia defense has its work cut out for it, but this is also a Georgia defense that hasn't allowed a single touchdown. For all of the qualms that we've had about this Georgia offense, we expected it to come out here and be this 40-plus point per game offense, and I still think that there's plenty of room for them to be that sort of offense. The rush defense was beat up a little bit against Kentucky. They allowed 110 yards. They're allowing 110 yards per game, but not exactly a glaring weakness here. Alabama sort of benefited from the types of teams that they've played at this early part of the season. They're number 1 in the country in yards gained before contact per rush. That tells me that they haven't really played an elite team defensively. This is an elite team defensively. I don't necessarily think that Alabama is going to be able to roll out here and do a lot of the same things that they've been able to do to this point of the season. It's just on Georgia right now to put Jalen Milroe in a difficult spot. Make him beat you with his arm again. He was able to do it last year, kept him ahead of the chains. You're not hitting those deep patterns against this Georgia defense like you were against Wisconsin or South Alabama or South Florida. I mean, not South Alabama. It's going to be an interesting test. And honestly, this is strength on strength. It's strength on strength. And this is an unbelievably compelling matchups for this reason and just this reason alone. But honestly, if you look at everything else that they can do, it's an unbelievable game. It's an unbelievable matchup, and it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to build upon what you've already set the base for in regards to Georgia versus Jalen Milroe and the Alabama offense. I agree. Obviously, you cannot let Milroe beat you with the deep ball. You got to know where Ryan Williams is on every play. And I think the Georgia secondary can do that. This is a secondary that I think is tied for the lead in the nation in fewest explosives given. I think they've only allowed 2 of those. Depending on what measurement, the 20-yard, 30-yard, however you want to define explosives, they're somewhere up there. So obviously you know where Ryan Williams is, but it's not just don't let Jalen Milroe beat you with his arm deep. You also can't let him beat you with his legs short. And I think that's obvious. When it's on 3rd down, you have to be careful with how you approach this guy. And I think Georgia learned that lesson in last year's semifinal game, apologies, in the SEC title game,
a quarterfinal game.
Loss. Yeah, essentially. But then also, as you saw Alabama affected in that semifinal game, maybe they did see a different way to approach rushing and attacking Jalen Milroe with your defensive front. So I'm interested to see how that plays out here. I want to let you go ahead and have a pop before I continue. I know you got.
Yeah, I don't mean to cut you. I don't want to cut you off here, but this is something specific that I wanted to mention as well that I forgot until you actually said that and reminded me. It was his ability. It's not his ability to necessarily pop off and explode in the rushing attack. It's his ability to take what would be a 2-yard gain where he just sort of runs out of bounds and falls forward and picks up an extra 4 yards, 3, 4, 5 yards or something like that. Just an extra little bit. It's staying ahead of schedule. That is huge for Jalen Milroe in this game.
I think so is managing the 3rd and medium, like the 3rd and 4 to 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, because that's where you really get Milroe come into play with his legs as well, especially if the rush comes and he's flushed. And there were plenty of lanes a year ago. That's something that Georgia has to eliminate. You got to make him drive. And we say that about a lot of teams, but like, you just can't give him easy scores, legs or arms. And a lot of that is going to come through the deep ball passing. Just make him drive, force him to face multiple 3rd downs, stuff like that, that gives you an advantage to either pin your ears back and get after him or to get them off the field. I think that's an aspect of it. The other thing is because Milroe's going to run. I think he has to in this game. You got to make him feel when he's running. And what I mean by that is he's got to be hit. You cannot let him get out of bounds. You cannot let him slide for a 1st down. You have got to create contact. Obviously, legally and within the rules, you don't want to deal with 15-yard penalties. You certainly don't want to deal with targeting and ejections and that nonsense. But you got to beat him up a little bit as best you can when he does use his legs. For Georgia, you got to run the ball. And if it's not running, you still got to run the ball. If you haven't established it, you cannot abandon the run. I think that's so important, especially for an offense. And look, whether it's fair or not, we're going to continue to approach Carson Beck and how he looked last year with how he's looked this year. For an offense that doesn't have a Ladd McConkey, for an offense that doesn't have a Brock Bowers, you cannot abandon the run. There are not currently guys that we are, I would say, respectful of in terms of go-to receivers to bail out the security blanket for Carson Beck. And the other aspect of this, which I think is a question more than a statement, is I do wonder what Georgia has left in the bag offensively. I think they've been pretty closed down. I think they were closed down against Clemson. They were obviously closed down. Who was that? Tennessee Tech. And then potentially more closed down than they should have been against Kentucky based on how that game played out. I'm interested to see some of the new wrinkles and what they can do in this one offensively, because I can't imagine we've seen the full extent of Carson Beck. I don't imagine we've seen the full extent of Trevor Etienne or even of Mike Bobo for that matter. And then just real quick on the flip side, I feel like we say this every year, but Georgia is one of, if not the very best secondary in football. And I think you have to use that secondary more than most teams would. And what I mean by that is for a team like Georgia that has the front that they have, there's probably a desire to make the front be the big impact in that game. I almost would shy away from that and let the secondary do its job.
Yeah.
And you'll obviously get to the quarterback more so with coverage sacks than maybe with blitzes and with rushes. I'm interested to see how that plays out for Glenn Schumann and the Georgia defense. But this is a really, really interesting matchup. I agree with you. Alabama's got to run the ball and not just Jalen Milroe. That would be a big boost to them. They've got to hit on the big plays, and they've got to stay out of these situations where Georgia can do a number of different things defensively, whether it's blitz, whether it's rush, whether it's pull 8 back into coverage.
Yeah.
They need to make Georgia predictable defensively, if that makes sense. And I think that gives them the best advantage. And then, the last one, which we've already talked about, Carson Beck needs to look like the guy who is a top 10 pick. And it's not all on him. We understand that. I think part of that maybe goes with what's open and what's been closed from the offense. But he has to outplay to some extent Jalen Milroe, at least as a passer in this game.
Yeah. I mean, Jalen Milroe outplayed everybody in this game last year, and that's why they won the SEC title game. But look, I do want to shine a light here on the Alabama defense here for a quick second. Mostly because I don't think there's been a light that's shined on them at all this season. And that's not to say that they're bad or overrated or whatever. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying they haven't really been tested at all. We were hoping to see a little bit more. in that game against Wisconsin, Van Dyke was injured on the first drive. And after that, it's kind of hard to really discern who is what and what is where. And I'm looking specifically at that secondary where 9 of their 12 guys are either freshmen or transfers. They're new faces. And I understand maybe that's an overrated thought or whatever. They just haven't been tested. They haven't played together in any sort of consistent way. And when you don't play together and you're not tested at a high level, and then all of a sudden you have a guy who could be a top 5 draft pick, and this deep Georgia wide receiver core, albeit it's been a little banged up here as of late, then things might unravel, and they might unravel quickly. I'm not saying that they will. I'm just saying we don't know yet. And the numbers have been strong for Alabama. I mean, you're 8.5 points per game. You're 115 yards passing per game. That's really good. You've only allowed 3 explosive plays, depending on which one you want to look at, 20 yards or more. They've only allowed 3. That's really damn good. But again, you haven't played the best player you faced was Van Dyke, and he was 5 of 6 or so on one drive, and then after that he leaves the game and he's injured and he's in a boot for the rest of the game. But I think it's an interesting thought there. But then for Georgia as well, Michael Williams might be back in this game. That's extremely important because the rotational depth against Kentucky was not where it needed to be. You had multiple guys playing 50, 60 snaps. And for most teams, that's ordinary. For Georgia, you literally were living in probably in the 35-ish range. That's where they would much rather be. And getting a guy like Michael Williams back is going to help them out a good bit. Sustained Alabama drives. That's your biggest thing. And like you said, running the ball, hitting your short to intermediate passes. It goes both ways, though. Carson Beck, you want to keep your offense out there on the field. You want to sustain drives. You want to take out that home field advantage as quickly as you can, because last thing I'm going to say, it's the revenge factor. I wonder how much that's going to play into this game. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't think Kirby gives a damn. I don't think that that's really where this is going to be won or lost necessarily with Kirby Smart and the revenge factor. But as far as the players are concerned, you know damn well that they've had this game circled for a very long time. That's the reason that Georgia was not able to go out and three-peat. They weren't even given the opportunity because you lost this game to Alabama. It's because of Alabama. And I wonder if it's going to swing in their favor. But the thing is, emotion, everyone always likes to think, the revenge factor is going to play in their favor. Sometimes you play reckless. Sometimes you play out of control. Sometimes you lose your head. And when you're also in a road environment, say things start going against you and that revenge factor, you play too passionately, that's when you go get a targeting call. That's when you hold somebody. That's where something you play out of character. It can go both ways. So I think it's a factor that you need to keep an eye on throughout the course of this game. Abe, we've just spent almost 20 minutes on this game. Do you have any more thoughts on this one before we move on?
Yeah, just two kind of random thoughts. I'll skip one because it's obvious. So just one. See if the special teams helps decide this game. Alabama, if we remember, Peyton Richard, or Will Riker, whatever his name was. They got a kicker who transferred in from Miami of Ohio, was very good last year, missed only 1 field goal, but has made only 1 this year, attempted only 1. Made a bunch of extra points though for Bama. But certainly Peyton Woodring at Georgia, accurate, deep ball, leg. So they might be a slight advantage. I'll look to see if it plays out in that manner. Maybe who will or won't be forced to either go for it or punt instead of field goal, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Let's move into another game that's going to be very important as far as seeding and everything else goes in a conference. It's a game that's lost a little bit of steam, unfortunately. It's one where both teams are coming in off of a loss. It's Oklahoma State and it's Kansas State. One loss a little bit uglier than another. Oklahoma State, of course, coming in after losing a tight game, at least on the scoreboard, to Utah, the newcomer to the conference. Kansas State losing in ugly fashion in a nightcap against BYU, where we broke this game down earlier this week, Abe, and that Kansas State loss wasn't quite as bad as that score might have indicated. It was a couple of things that bounced their way, but you look at the actual numbers, Kansas State didn't get beat that bad. Oklahoma State, on the other hand, got beat a little bit worse than that final score might have indicated. But ultimately, we look up and down at this game. It was a game of what could have been, as far as the hype is concerned. But that doesn't make it any less important because both of these teams are still very much in control of their destiny in the future of the Big 12 conference. But you have to win this game. Your margin for error, we talked about it with Georgia the last bit. If you lose this game, you lose control of your destiny, and you need some other teams to do you some favors. So this is a critical one for both of these squads.
Yeah, and also unlike Georgia, who would almost be a certain lock to get into the college football playoffs as a 10-2 team, I think either of these teams at 10-2 are probably on the outside looking in. Look, Oklahoma State gave up 456 yards to Utah last week, and that's obviously without Cam Rising. They couldn't get it done stopping the run, and so I expect Kansas State to pound DJ Giddens and Dylan Edwards, and just get after it that way, especially because the quarterback there, Avery Johnson, is coming off essentially his worst game as the starting quarterback for Kansas State. And the Oklahoma State discussion, Garrett, is kind of the same as we've had for the last 3 weeks. I don't trust Alan Bowman. I've never trusted Alan Bowman. And if they're not getting a Heisman level performance from Ollie Gordon, which they haven't come close to any of these weeks, I just don't know if I buy them. And so we keep waiting. There's no reason that we're aware of that Ollie Gordon is not better than he has been.
Mm-hmm.
But until, and look, maybe this is the breakout, but until I see it any differently from him, I just do not trust that offense. Like you mentioned, they couldn't get anything going a week ago. And so I'm, until further notice, I have lost all faith in Oklahoma State being able to win a shootout type of game. And to an extent, I expect that's what this will be if Kansas State has its way.
Yeah, and Avery Johnson's going to want a bounce back performance. He threw the pair of interceptions in that game last week, and I think he can do that. I'm not. This Oklahoma State team is just so hot and cold. It's so hot and cold. It was hot and cold last year, and it's been hot and cold this year. They are, in reality, a couple of plays away from also losing a game to Arkansas this year. They've just not been at the level that they need to be at. Kansas State, they've got DJ Giddens in that backfield, and I think he's been a little bit more consistent, ironically, than what we've seen from Ollie Gordon this year. We have all these expectations, but what are expectations if they're not realized on the field? And shaky quarterback play, I think, affects Oklahoma State a lot more than it does Kansas State. And the expectation for me in this one is that Kansas State is going to get back and right the ship in this game. And I mean, Alan Bowman was benched in this game. They brought him back in the fourth quarter, but after he came back into the game, he looked a lot better, and they started to rally a little bit. The hope for Oklahoma State in this game is that guy that you saw in the fourth quarter, where he picked his head up and he kept fighting and battling and rallied his team to a potential comeback win, that needs to be the guy that you see on the field on Saturday in this game. But unless we see that, I don't really have a lot of faith in Oklahoma State as a team.
Yeah. The other thing, I just saw this stat, if I could find it again real quick. Oklahoma State has won 86 games in a row when they've held an opponent to 20 points or fewer. So if you're looking for a number, 21. I mean, if Kansas State can get to 21, I just don't, because of the offensive issues we've seen with Oklahoma State this season, that feels like that might be enough. But if Oklahoma State has their way, and we'll see. I will say this: the Oklahoma State has a very good offensive line, so it might be up to linebackers and safeties in the secondary for Kansas State in this game.
Yeah, I think that's really
I guess good in pass protection. Maybe not so great in the runs, or else we'd see more from Ollie Gordon. But very good pass protecting O line.
Still to this point,
I don't know. I think he's hurt. I think he's
something
hurt.
Might be up. Something might be up. But yeah. Louisville and Notre Dame, this is a game where it was a bit of a slugfest last year, but that was also in Kentucky. Louisville won that game. It's up in South Bend, Indiana this year, and I think it's going to be a little bit of a different story here. But ultimately, Tyler Shugg showed us something last week, albeit against likely an inferior secondary and inferior defense just in general. But Shugg's been solid, 283, 8 touchdowns, hasn't turned the ball over a single time. Specifically, Ja'Cory Brooks. He's been the playmaker here for the Cardinals. But Notre Dame, I think, is looking to continue some of the success that they've had in that secondary specifically. That's where they want to see this team really shine. And you're going to have to in this game, because Ja'Cory Brooks has been a solid guy for them. And if you let him beat you over the top of this field, then it's going to be kind of a difficult area for him. But the rushing attack, mostly because, I mean, it's been inconsistent at best. You have no player who has over 16 carries. Nobody on this team has over 175 yards rushing. If it's not happening for Shug and Ja'Cory Brooks specifically, then it's probably not going to happen a lot at all. But on the other hand, I mean, Louisville's been vulnerable in their secondary. Notre Dame hasn't really been super successful there, but they can run the hell out of the ball. 238 yards rushing per game this year. Jeremiah Love has been strong, 7.5 yards per carry for him. And I think that's where the strength on strength matchup is in this game, because Louisville's found success in stopping the run. They just held Georgia Tech to 40 yards rushing to non-quarterbacks, 87 yards per game this season. And I think if you are Louisville and you could stop the run in any sort of consistent fashion, you give yourself a chance to win this game. But you're kind of hoping for that big play from Ja'Cory Brooks and then just stopping the run. And I think then you'll give yourself a shot. But if you're Notre Dame, I think you got to trust your strength on strength. And they have to think that their strengths are better than Louisville's. But it didn't work in their favor last year by that same metric.
Yeah, both of these teams are tough to get a good read on, Garrett. I mean, Notre Dame, because Texas A&M's kind of up in the air. I don't really know what Notre Dame is coming off of that loss to Northern Illinois in week 2. They've looked great, right? They blew out Purdue, and they were very comfortable taking care of Miami of Ohio. Louisville has got the wins over Austin Peay and whoever else it was, Jacksonville State. The Georgia Tech game, I mean, courtesy of some miscues from Tech offensively, that game got a little bit out of hand, but they weren't overly impressive. And you're right. Like that Notre Dame secondary matching up with Ja'Cory Brooks, it just feels like this could be a problem for a Louisville offense that has looked decently explosive at times. If they're not in this game, I just don't know if they can go pound for pound and match up with Notre Dame, especially I mean, Riley Leonard has looked great since that ugly performance against Northern Illinois. And so they told us they started to sniff their own air, believe their own hype, and obviously that's gone. How much of that was a real conversation, and how much of it is about this Notre Dame team getting back on track? Either way, it is a huge game for Notre Dame. I don't think you can understate how big a game this is for Notre Dame. This is one of only 2 opportunities they're going to have. They already beat A&M, so that's separate. But the only other ranked team that they're going to play this year, unless Stanford pulls a shocker this weekend and maybe ends up in the rankings next week, is USC, if they're even still ranked by the end of the year. Notre Dame wants to climb into that 12, right? And they're 16 right now. They'd obviously jump a spot if they beat Louisville, at least one spot. They don't have many chances. The Northern Illinois game killed them. And they're going to need to win this game if they're going to want to get into the playoffs. This is essentially season on the line. If we're going to be on, like, if we're really going to boil it down to as serious as it probably is, I don't think Notre Dame can get into the playoffs if they don't win this game.
But they have to.
Yeah. And so they need to approach it in that manner. So there is no more, we let our own hype get in front of us stuff. They need to come out hungry. And I think at home, with questions still about Louisville and what I believe is an offense that can have the lid put on them and be bottled up a little bit at Louisville. I look for Notre Dame to come in and be assertive in this game. And the problem is we thought we'd see that against Northern Illinois, and they didn't show up. So we'll see how that one plays out. But for Louisville, they have been explosive. And if they can do it here against Notre Dame, it'll be eye-opening for them as well, right? We're kind of like, yeah, they were 2-0 coming into Georgia Tech, but what did you really know about the team because of their opponents? Like, all right, they got past Georgia Tech. They had some help from some miscues, and they're 3-0. They're undefeated. Like, okay, they're ranked, but like, do we really buy it? You go onto the road and handle business against Notre Dame, especially when your strength matches up with their strength, the wide receivers versus the Notre Dame secondary, and you handle business there. I think we maybe hesitate or slow down that conversation of Clemson and Miami in the ACC. I think it would become a 3-team discussion if they're able to do that. So a lot on the line for Louisville as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Louisville team that hasn't really been tested all that much. I mean, Georgia Tech handed him that game last week. I thought Georgia Tech, for the most part, was pound for pound as good of a team in that performance as Louisville was. But when you have a block kick return for a touchdown and a backwards pass return for a touchdown, really hurts your ability to win football games. And that's just really what it comes down to. But one thing that Riley Leonard, I think, can take solace in is that for however solid this rushing defense is for Louisville, Haynes King was able to find some creases last week. He had, 60, 70 yards or something on the ground, something like that. But he found the creases. And Riley Leonard is that same type of breed of quarterback as Haynes King. He can beat you through the air, but if he can get his legs going, that's where he starts to get very dangerous. And Riley Leonard is, like you said, he's improved down the stretch, but you got to stay ahead of the chains. This is a Louisville team that really likes to get after the passer. They can blow them up in the pass rush. They're averaging something like 5 sacks a game, four sacks a game, something like that. So if you're Louisville, just keep them in passing downs. Like if you can keep them behind the chains, then you give yourself an opportunity to get after Riley Leonard. But him using his legs, him being able to use those legs and really get out and make some trouble in the flats, that's where Notre Dame can really start to cause some trouble, because then that opens up things on the inside for Jeremiah Love. And maybe that's going to be part of their game plan. I think that'd be a very interesting one, but it's going to be an interesting one. Nevertheless, this is a 3:30 game over there on Peacock. But the 7:30 game on NBC is another interesting game up there in the Big Ten. Kind of a prove it opportunity for both Illinois and for Penn State, but for slightly different reasons. Illinois, I mean, they just came in from the huge win against Nebraska, overtime win for them on Friday night on primetime. You're going to be back on primetime here against Penn State, one of the old guard, one of the teams who I would say are one of the front runners to potentially not win the Big Ten necessarily, but be one of the representatives in the college football playoff. I mean, Penn State, they took a lot of lumps last year. They won 10 games, but their 2 losses were to Michigan and they were to Ohio State. They're teams that, I mean, you're very clearly a leg below the rest of the competition in the Big Ten Conference. This is a game that Penn State has historically, this is the one where they kind of flex their muscle. But Illinois, they're going to be a tough out. This isn't going to be that sort of bend over type of opponent that they have been in the past. Brett Bielema has this team in a good position right now. Illinois, they're fresh off that dramatic win, but I mean, this is a different beast. Do we trust Illinois yet?
Yeah, I mean, look, from the Penn State perspective, this is something you've harped on for a while, and that is, when are they going to win the big games? When are they going to show up against the teams that are above them? And look, Illinois is not in that group right now. We're talking about traditionally what has been Michigan and Ohio State. This year, maybe we're talking about Ohio State and potentially Oregon, although I still need to see more from them. And I'm not saying that they can kind of get that chip off of their shoulder by beating Illinois, but if they can look comfortable, right, have their way with them a little bit, it is going to make you start to open your eyes a little bit and ask some questions. I think they've been okay offensively. Penn State has. Drew Aller's been pretty efficient, but they haven't really had that eye-opening game. And I think this is the opportunity to do so. You're at home at night against a Illinois team that's coming off a very emotional type of game, a very emotional type of victory, and where they've gotten a lot of publicity and press in the aftermath as well. And you start to wonder how much of this kind of Notre Dame start to believe their own hype, and emotionally, can you recharge yourself sort of? And I think that's the difference between what makes some of these schools, some of these programs really great, is that they can take an emotionally charged victory and put it in the past and ramp back up for the next week. And that's what you have to do in these conferences like the Big Ten, like the SEC. I'd like to see a little bit more from the wideouts there at Penn State. And so I'm going to be looking for that. And then the other thing is, and I think this is what makes Illinois dangerous. And I think Nebraska probably found that out the hard way. with the quarterback that they have, with the head coach that they have, you cannot let them hang around. You have got to bury them when you have the chance. And I think Nebraska had some chances in the first half, especially when you look at how the end of the first half played out for Nebraska with some missed opportunities. They didn't bury them. They hung around, and then they found their rhythm. And with Luke Altmaier, who, if you want to speak more about him, I'm going to give you some. But, man, the guy is just steady as a college quarterback. He's seen a lot of things. I don't think going into Penn State, into Beaver Stadium, is going to mess with him too much. And so that experience, that veteran leadership, combined with Bielema, who's not going to be intimidated by the atmosphere either after the history that he's had in major college football. So Illinois is not going to back down. They're not going to hand Penn State this game just because, oh, look, Illinois is back in the rankings. It's their happy to be here moment. No, like they're coming to play. And so for Penn State to win this game and to win it impressively, they need to show us something. And so I look forward to seeing if they can do that.
Yeah. I mean, look, if Illinois wins this game, you want to watch those fireworks come flying. Then that's a good way to start getting some attention up there. But you mentioned Luke Altmaier. I mean, yeah, he's played it safe, and it's worked. I mean, 71% passing. He's no interceptions. He's good for about 200 yards per game. It's not sexy, but it's working, and against a Penn State team, which is not necessarily explosive yet, it's shown improvement in that regard. But Illinois wants to play it safe, stay ahead of the chains, drive. Boring. Boring is good for Illinois. And then on defense, maybe force some turnovers and see what you can do. But Drew Aller, I mean, like he's been up and down. 17.5 yards per completion this year, significantly improved from last year. But it's Katrin Allen, it's Nick Singleton. They're averaging 7 yards per carry on the ground. They've been a top 10 team. I mean, like that's what you expect them to do. Now you're actually starting to get into a team that's not really going to fold. I mean, like this isn't necessarily Bowling Green, a team that you also struggled with because you weren't hitting those big plays and then you weren't really playing very effective football. But you looked good. You looked explosive in that win against West Virginia. I mean, like you've shown flashes of potentially being a really good football team, but you have to come out here and you have to be consistent against an Illinois team that's not going to bend over. So use your home field advantage, maybe hit a couple of big plays and make Illinois quit. But like you said, you got to beat them early. I think that Illinois, they're going to falter at some point in this game. I think Penn State's just a better football team. But if you're Penn State, you want to win this game convincingly because I think you have to convince yourself, you have to convince everybody else that you belong with the big dogs. This isn't necessarily that big barometer that Ohio State or any of those other big opponents are going to be necessarily. But you can also, on the other hand, lose a lot of trust from a lot of different people. Abe, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, just along those lines here, Garrett, anytime in like the BCS computer nonsense was its own discussion. Anytime you have a committee and you're dealing with a human element, I refuse to believe that they're able to ignore margin of victory. And if Penn State does lose to Ohio State and maybe they drop another one or whatever, however it may be, a Big Ten title game and get a second loss there, whatever the situation may be, you need to look good against other good teams. And when it comes down to it, if Penn State's a 10-2 team at the end of the year trying to hang on to a playoff spot, you can't sit here and tell me that a 23-21 victory is going to feel the same as a 53-21 victory. And so again, you don't want to start to project those sorts of discussions too early. But that's the reality of the situation. And you need to look good. We've got all these teams that have some sort of notch in their belt to an extent, right? Like Miami beat the hell out of Florida. Georgia beat the hell out of Clemson. Texas beat the hell out of Michigan. Alabama beat up on Wisconsin. And there's a couple of other examples as well. They should add their name to that. Like you're going to want to add your name into that group and be like, yeah, I know they lost to Ohio State and they had some things go against them, but man, look at how they beat up on Illinois. Look at how they beat up on so-and-so. So as much as like, winning the game matters, but like doing it impressively against an Illinois team that you are, and I agree with you, you're just a better team than should be. That stuff matters when it comes down to it. If you're you got 4 or 5 teams all fighting for 2 or 3 spots.
Yeah, and when you look at the numbers at the end of the season, you said this was Penn State's record against top 25 opponents.
Yeah.
It counts. This is one of those games. So
Yeah.
if you're Penn State, I think Illinois, just get in there, put up a good fight and have a good performance. If you're Penn State, a win, I feel like may not be enough. You have to come in and you have to look impressive while doing it. But one game that might be a little bit ugly, let's start going. We'll go rapid fire here. I got a couple of games I want to talk about here as we start winding down on.
Sure, you want to talk about this one, or just feel you have to?
5 preview show. We got a lot of stuff that we still got to get to. It's a jam-packed show. We got so much stuff that we want to talk about, because there's so much great college football. We do this every single week. So make sure you make sure you subscribe, follow along at Abe Gordon, at GChapATL. We do the live stream on Twitter. So if you're joining us there, thank you so much. Welcome. Great to have you. We also do this over on YouTube if you want to go check it out over there at 929 The Game. So subscribe, follow along. We have podcasts, everything else. So GChapATL at Abe Gordon on Twitter. But Abe, let's jump into this game. Another SEC matchup for Oklahoma. Auburn is at home. And I think of every team in the SEC, maybe like a Mississippi, there are a couple of examples, maybe, but they want to move on to next week. They want to get on to the next game because the last week was tough for Auburn. This is a team that in its wins, it's looked really good. In its losses, it's looked really bad. They threw 10 touchdown passes in the 2 wins with 0 picks and 3 touchdown passes with 8 picks in the 2 losses. Hank Brown and Peyton Thorne have been hot and cold, mostly cold. And that's why this Auburn team is 2-2. But on the other hand, this isn't the Oklahoma team that wants to move into next week, just like Auburn does. Jackson Arnold was benched in that game against Tennessee. He was sub 50% completion. He was not able to sustain any drives of any kind, and he had that ugly interception. And Michael Hawkins, he came in. They injected some life into the offense, looked better, but now it's a different test. You're a freshman starter. He's already been named the starter, but look, this is a tough first test. I don't care where Auburn ranks. Jordan-Hare Stadium is a different type of beast. But if you can connect with those mid-range passes, you keep those feet moving. I know he likes to run that football a little bit. You stay on the field because Auburn doesn't want to be on the field for whatever reason. They're last in time of possession. They're second to last with 14 turnovers. They want to give you the ball back. So if you're Michael Hawkins, sustain drives, stay out there on the field, be a little bit more consistent and avoid that freshman mistake, which might happen. Your offensive line, it's been leaky. Your wide receiver core, it's been inconsistent. It's also been banged up. This is an Auburn defense that still prides itself in successful play. This is a good defense. But I worry if this turns into a defensive slugfest. Michael Hawkins is the kind of guy he needs to have some success early in this game. Auburn, I don't know what to think of them. They're so hot and cold. And I have a hard time thinking that they're going to win this game. But Oklahoma, they're going to want to hit the reset button after a tough week last week against Tennessee.
Well, look, if you're Michael Hawkins and you're coming in for your first start in the SEC, it comes down to a couple of things, a couple of direct instructions from the head coach there. And that is, you cannot be the reason we lose this game. And what I mean by that is Auburn wants to beat itself. Offensively, they want to beat themselves. They try as they might, but they're just not good enough on offense. I do think for as much as we talked about the issues a week ago, Oklahoma does have a pretty good defense. And so Hawkins just needs to make it tougher for Auburn to win this game. And that means minimize the mistakes and be smart, efficient, safe. And punting is not the worst thing in the world in this game. You might say it'll be a defensive, affair. I think it's more a lack of offensive affair, at least in terms of the Oklahoma side of things. I think Oklahoma's D is very good, but you just can't help Auburn beat you if you're the quarterback there for the Sooners, and they'll beat themselves. So that's what I would focus on. That'd be the messaging all week. We trust the defense. They're going to get it done. We got to get 1 touchdown. We got to get 10 points, whatever it may be. we can't put too much on this freshman's shoulders for that reason. So I'm interested to see how it plays out, but I just don't trust this Auburn team at all, even at home.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, Oklahoma, I don't know what to expect of this offense. I mean, Auburn, I think, is going to set them up with in position to succeed, but you've got to take advantage of the plays that the Auburn defense gives you, because I think the Oklahoma defense will travel. But yeah, I mean, Auburn's going to give you the ball as much as they can. You know, it seems like they put the ball on the ground, they turn it over through the air, they do it all over the place. But ultimately, like, this Oklahoma offense, bigger picture, after losing Jeff Lebby, I mean, I understand Levy's struggled year one at Mississippi State, but he was still a really good offensive coordinator for Brent Venables. But you lose him and you lose Dylan Gabriel. You went from maybe a top 15 offense last year in all of college football to one of the worst in Power 5 this year through the first couple of starts. And no, it's not because they're facing real defenses in the SEC. No, it's because the offense has just been not good. That's it. They can't run the ball effectively. They can't pass the ball effectively. Not a lot has gone their way. I did see more life when Michael Hawkins was put into this lineup. They need to bottle that up and use that early in this game. Because if Oklahoma comes out and they start struggling early in this game, that's where I start seeing the recipe for an Auburn upset. That's when I start getting a little concerned about what the Sooners are going to do. I need to see the success early. That's really the biggest thing for me. Because if Auburn finds itself in a deficit, even if it's at home, that's when they're going to start pressing. That's when they're going to start throwing interceptions, because they've shown that they're more than capable of doing that. But if you're Auburn, on the other hand, use that home field advantage first and foremost. But Tennessee didn't really win against Oklahoma because they were able to stay on the field and sustain drives and do things like that. They were able to connect on a handful of explosive passes that really set them up on big plays. And that's how they got their points. Auburn is built in a kind of a similar way. They want to beat you down the field. They want to beat you with those explosive passes. If Oklahoma gives you the opportunity to do that on Saturday, you have to take advantage. It's just, you got to make sure you're completing it to a guy who's wearing blue, not a guy who's wearing white or red. That's the biggest thing. But let's move through here. Mississippi State at Texas. Not a lot of craziness in this one necessarily. Texas loses Quinn Ewers. They've not missed a beat, albeit they haven't really played anybody in the wake of him moving on with this oblique injury. Arch Manning, he's handled the ship all right. This won't be a big test for them. It's just the fact that it's your SEC opener. They've dominated with efficiency on offense and on defense, and the lack of running back depth hasn't hurt them yet. But you do have Oklahoma next, and then it's Georgia. That's where the big test is going to start coming out. But welcome to the SEC, Texas. Here's Mississippi State on a silver platter.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to see if they're going to try and clear Quinn Ewers for this one, or if it is Arch Manning heading into it. It's a game you can win with either quarterback. You're heading into an off week, so unless you're extremely confident in Quinn's ability to come back play and not risk further damage, you expect this one to be Arch again. And at that point, it's just limit the turnovers. That's the biggest question people had last week against Louisiana Monroe. Just limit the turnovers. You'll be fine.
Yeah, and Blake Shapen, he's gone for Mississippi State. It's been just tough for the Bulldogs. Michael Van Buren, he'll get some looks in this game. He'll be able to just kind of let it loose, and that's all you can do in a game like this, because Mississippi State, they're preparing for next season. Just wanted to give a quick shout out here to the Texas Longhorns, because they're coming into the SEC. It's just kind of a silver platter type of matchup there for them. But Ohio State's also going to get a quick shout out here, because it's been a whole lot of nothing for the Buckeyes. I mean, their 3 wins, I guess, are 157-20 margin, but it's Akron, it's Western Michigan, it's Marshall. Their next 2 opponents are going to tell us a little bit maybe about them. It's Michigan State, like you see here, and then it's Iowa. But the matchup with Oregon, that comes up in 2 weeks, and that's going to be your big matchup. That's the one that all eyes are going to be on. Will Howard might finally get tested just a little bit, but Michigan State, they've got their work cut out for him. Aiden Childs, he's been up and down like any young quarterback, and he'll find some opportunities to shine even in this game, but this is a different test entirely for this Michigan State team who've looked good in Jonathan Smith's first couple of games at the helm. And you won against Maryland. You had a tough fight against Boston College, but this is where the fun begins. You've got Ohio State on Saturday. You've got Oregon. Then it's Iowa. Then it's Michigan. That's where rubber's going to meet the road for Michigan State. I don't think you really have a puncher's chance in this one, but I did want to give them a shout out because they're 3-1 right now. And it's Ohio State's first actual, football team that they're going to be lining up against and playing on Saturday.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me with Ohio State is the variety of guys that have been what I would deem the best player in the game on a given day. I think we've seen Quinshon Judkins be that guy once. We've seen Jeremiah Smith be that guy once, and Abuka as well. It's just so difficult to control what they do offensively because there's so many guys you have to focus on. So I look for them to get out early and get a big lead by halftime and kind of cruise.
Yeah, and that's kind of the situation too. But Miami, that's one where I expect them to cruise as well. They've done nothing to tell me that they aren't the favorite in the ACC at this point. Sure, it was kind of a slow start against USF, but then they go on a 36-0 run. They crush the life out of them. This is an offense that doesn't suffer negative plays. It's a defense that creates several negative plays. Cam Ward, he's been a bona fide Heisman Trophy candidate. But I want to say this too, because I wanted to shout this out. Does Miami really have any tests left this season? I mean, you've got Louisville, the number 15 team in America. We'll find out a lot about them this week. But outside of that, like you had Florida State, you had Florida, and a lot of teams who've regressed. I mean, a lot of these teams have not really been up to snuff. They shouldn't miss the ACC championship unless they really do it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, to me, considering this is a Friday night game on Big Boy ESPN, the Fox game that is competing against Washington and Rutgers, and we'll hear from that when we get to shout-outs in a moment. Not like the most encapsulating game we've ever seen, like certainly not as must-watch as last Friday's game. So to me, this is about Cam Ward and the race for Heisman. Put on a show, brother. Like this is a nationally televised game. You're going to have eyes on. It's time to put on a show. And so I'm interested to see what he'll do in this one. But that's about as interested as I am in this. I tend to agree. I think Miami's a very good team. How good, I still don't know. We may not find out until the playoffs, quite frankly. But
at least the ACC championship game.
I guess. I mean, I guess against Clemson, theoretically, sure. But put on a show. Let's see it.
Yeah, I mean, this is also a Miami team that's consistently on a year-in, year-out basis, going back all the way to their last national championship. They have consistently beaten themselves at one point or another. And I want to see if Mario Cristobal actually has this team where, they're set up to succeed legitimately. And, I mean, they've looked good. They've looked dominant. They haven't shown any weaknesses. They've shown no reason to think that they can't go out and win the ACC. But we may just not see it until you get to a Louisville or something like that. But this Virginia Tech team was one that I expected it to take a big step forward. Kyron Drones it just hasn't been what I wanted to see from the Hokies. They got the work cut out for them here. But Friday night, crazy things happen on Friday nights. Maybe a hurricane had just passed through. So we'll see how that one ends up going. But Abe, we've reached that time. I'll let you go first, but we get our shout outs. What you got, brother?
Yeah, I want to speak about a couple of overlooked teams that at this point are still undefeated. You got Duke and Pittsburgh in the ACC.
Yeah.
You got BYU, UCF, and Iowa State in the Big 12. We just mentioned Rutgers, team to watch on Friday night as they host Washington. Indiana, also undefeated in the Big 10. And Washington State in the Pac-2, undefeated. So I know we're talking about all these top teams, but there are a couple others that are off to good starts, and it doesn't mean they're going to find their way into the top 15. But just want to give a couple shout-outs on those.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, and look, those teams they're undefeated right now. They'll likely not be undefeated when
they'll fall into what they will be, but they deserve some credit.
And look, at the end of the day, just keep yourself in position, and with the expanded playoff, crazy things can happen. If you give yourself reasons to win and be considered, you'll be considered. And you can't do it unless you're actually undefeated for some of those teams. So keep fighting, keep churning, keep doing what you got to do. But my shout out, I want to give it to the Arkansas offense because they got a big old test on Saturday playing Texas A&M 3:30 on ESPN in Jerry World in Dallas. They found their groove under Bobby Petrino. especially on the ground. Not 520 yards per game. That's pretty damn good. I don't care who you are. 240 of those are coming on the ground. You have 17 rushing touchdowns. Look, Jaquindon Jackson has been a load. He's been awesome on the ground. Taylon Green has been slippery. Taylon Green's been a beast. The Boise State transfer. He's been a beast. But also on the flip side, this is a Texas A&M team that they're 1-11 against over the last 12 years. They've been a bigger hog killer than those dudes who go around in the helicopters and snipe them in Southeast Texas. It's brutal out there for a hog. And I want to see this offense travel. I want to see it head out there to Jerry World and show them how a real offense works, not one that just paid its quarterback $50+ million and can't complete passes on a consistent basis. Turnovers and mistakes hurt them several times. Oklahoma State and Arkansas, Notre Dame and Texas A&M. I want to see who plays a cleaner game. It should be a lot of fun. Marshall Reed, too. He's played really well since that win against Florida. He looked pretty solid last week, albeit in a tight contest. I don't blame Marcel Reed for that one. But look, Abe, it's been fun, man. It's been fun. Yo, we do this every single week. Like the podcast, follow along, subscribe. We talk twice a week. College football overtime. We have a blast. I hope you did too. So check us out. We'll be here again on Sunday. We will be reacting to all of these games, and we'll have a lot of fun there too. So like and subscribe. We'll follow along all season long. Please enjoy the games on Saturday. I know I don't have to tell you twice because it'll be a fantastic slate of games. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. This is the College Football Overtime Podcast. We'll see you again very soon. Thanks so much for joining us.